Okay, well, thank you for being here to everyone. I want to especially thank Barry Brummett and Joshua Barbour for agreeing to be our panelists today. We're going to be talking about three topics: online asynchronous discussions, group projects in an online course, and testing. And so I will launch in with the first question here, and we'll go with Barry first. Many faculty say it's challenging getting students to rigorously engage in online discussions. So that sometimes the student postings are superficial and perfunctory. And so tell us how you structure your discussions in your online classes and how you grade them and how you encourage students to demonstrate deeper thinking.
Sure. The online discussion boards, I think I have for all but one class. So I found them very, I think, successful. So here are the factors that I use. One is for each unit in the course, I've got prompts, maybe 4 or 5 prompts. And these are usually items from popular culture, because that's what I teach, or something from the news or whatever. And it will each prompt is the first in a discussion thread. It's threaded replies, and so I will post something. I'll say, now here's an example that seems to illustrate what we talked about in the course on XYZ. Where do you see something like this, or do you agree it's XYZ? I ask some questions designed to get them to think. And then I turn them loose, and I tell them not to post unsubstantiated comments. In other words, don't just say, that's great, I like that, and then move on. And I do monitor it. And if necessary, I will just weigh in and say, now remember, be substantive, etc. But I usually don't have to do that. I usually find that they are, that they do get involved, they get engaged. I think a lot of that has to do with how interesting you make the prompt and how connected to the course material. So I'm not just asking them to, go see a ball game, tell me about it. But go see a ball game, and how does this relate to what we talked about in Unit 2 and we discussed XYZ. So it's kind of substantively grounded, and I do go through. I don't chastise anyone for anything unsubstantive, but I don't count it. And the reason for that is I want it to be kind of like what you might do in class. In class, if I got a comment from a student, I would never say, well, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. Forget it. Don't ever do that again. So I don't want to discourage them. If I don't count it, I don't tell them I don't count it. I just don't count it. And I have for every class that has a discussion board, that has discussion boards, I set it up so that a certain number of substantive posts has different grade consequences. So I think it's like if they have 5 to 8 substantive comments over the course of a semester, they get a 0, no harm, no foul. Below that, they get some points, down to 5 points deducted, and above that, they get some points up to 5 points added. So they do have that as an incentive. But I've always been impressed by the extent to which they do get into it. They do interact with each other. They are cordial. Nobody calls other people names, because the world is watching if they do, and it's I think that's been a pretty successful tool to use. I also this is not exactly down the question, but In some of the classes, I will break students up into groups. They will put together a presentation, with Google Groups or PowerPoint or Prezi or whatever, and that's in a separate place, and that will be the first in a threaded discussion. And I find students really get into commenting on each other's works, and that counts towards the discussion points also. So I find really good engagement that way, and I've been pretty happy with the results. I do have to, of course, look very carefully at the prompts every semester. Some of them will be dead links, some of them will be old news. So I try to keep that fairly current and not do it too far in advance of the semester.
Gary, just a quick question. Over how many days do you normally let a discussion unfold? Is it 2 or 3 days? Is it just a 1 day for a discussion? Is it the whole week?
For the course of the unit. So let's say a unit is, I don't know what, 3 weeks, which is probably about what they are on average. They may start posting the first day of it, and they may continue posting until midnight of the day on which they take the test for that.
So you're letting that kind of unfold over a pretty long time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I might, if I have, say, 5 prompts, I might get, 80 comments prompt with, say, a 50-person enrollment. So
it's the entire class is
entire
engaged,
class.
And some of them will engage with each other at each other's comments at different points. Sounds like it's really quite organic.
And but one thing it just always astonishes me, there will be some students who just don't. They just don't. I think, maybe they haven't read the syllabus or whatever. They lose points.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
But
what can you do?
Thanks, Barry.
Josh, let me ask you, you use Slack for discussions rather than the Canvas discussion board. So tell us how you set up your Slack discussion assignments and how you grade them and how you encourage deeper thinking, and also group size as well.
Yeah. So do you mind if I share my screen really quickly, Mary?
Yeah, let me enable this. Just a second. And now you can share your screen.
Now I have the power. Okay. You should all see Slack. Do you see it there, Mary?
Yes.
So this is a prototypical Slack discussion. My approach was inspired by Barry, one of the discussion formats that he talked about, actually, but we do things a little bit differently. Over the course of a regular semester, the students would have one Slack discussion for that week. That usually synced up with something that they're learning that week, some content. Although we vary kind of what the assignments are. This moon landing one is one that I would assign along with a unit on like small group decision making, and they would receive a first prompt that would ask them to do a task as a group, some activity together. And, they go through and they're discussing with each other and sharing information. And then once they come up with kind of their answer to that first prompt together, then we share them reflecting questions. And then they talk about those reflecting questions and we're in there with them. And so this is kind of the prototypical design. The Slack discussions usually occur over the period of about 2 to 3 days, maybe sometimes longer. Another example, and this is the one that took inspiration from your class, Barry, is you had something I think called the end of days fair, or?
Yeah, one of my classes is on apocalyptic rhetoric. And I use this in another class or two, but I have them turn in a research plan. their research project at the end will be based on, but I use the research plan to form affinity groups.
Mm.
For
Oh,
instance,
that's a good way to do it.
yeah, when I'm teaching Arguing the End of the World, the research plan may give me to understand that there are 7 people who want to research Nazi apocalypse.
Mm.
Boom, they're in an affinity group, and I tell them, okay, here's the group, here's your other members, go out and I tell them an important part of research, and these are usually independent inquiry flagged. An important part of research is both to do your own research, but also to network with other scholars doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So you can have inspiration and that kind of thing. So they go off and talk amongst themselves and come up with some pretty nice and interesting presentations across the different topics of their affinity group.
Yeah, I think they really do like to see each other's work. This is, we at the end of the semester, one of the Slack discussions that we do that is semester-wide, or class-wide, excuse me, it's all 60 students in this case, is they share a digital media deliverable that they created, which range from them putting on kind of a skit or play, to them talking over PowerPoint, to one team actually in previous semester did an animated video that went along with their presentation. Some folks have done a Prezi, so it really ranges. And then, we populate this and we frame the instructions with again, a first prompt in the Slack discussion. In this case, it's asking them to watch each one and then ask questions and share kudos. And then underneath each heading for each team, there's a thread of back and forth where they're talking with each other. Because I think the first question that you asked, Mary, was how do I structure things in Slack? And this is how. So each discussion in some cases gets its own channel. That's what's over here on the left-hand side, or channels. But in some cases, a team will get a channel. So this team, for example, called themselves the Kicking Assets. They came up with their own names. And over the course of their weeks together, they would have multiple Slack discussions in here. Another one that we did just for fun at one point that was class-wide was a GIF contest, where they picked a GIF or a GIF, depending on how you like to call it. And then in the general channel, we all voted for the team to have their favorite one. This was a discussion of a case study around a kind of classic case in organizational communication around the shuttle disasters. And so here's the initial prompt. It asks them to talk with each other about the case. And then after they do that, there's some reflecting that they do as the second part. So I think the reason why this is what Slack looks like. This is how it's structured. And the reason why I use Slack as opposed to, say, the Canvas discussion built-in tech is, one, I think that Slack is a more immersive kind of tool, and it's one that lets them use images and links and calling out to each other in a way that's more organic and more consistent with other technologies that they use. Another reason that we use Slack is that for most of our students, this is a platform that they will see at work, or that if not this one, then one like it. And so since this is a class that's meant to be foundational in helping them think about the world of work, we try to use the technology. In fact, the last unit in the class is a technology-focused unit. And as a team, one of their very last Slack discussions is coming up with, if they were going to make a recommendation to the next class about how they could be successful using Slack, what would those recommendations be? And they have to base their recommendations in the technology-related material that we're learning. So that's Slack kind of in a nutshell. I could talk more, Mary, about the structuring of the assignments and so forth, if you'd like, but that's Slack. I just wanted to pause there and see if.
And what size are your groups that you work with?
In some cases, the groups will be the entire class, right? So at the beginning of the semester, they do a self-introductory video where they post a short 2-minute video of themselves introducing themselves, and we ask them to give a tip for online classes, their recommendation for being successful in online classes. And in that general channel, they talk with each other and get to know each other. But for most of the Slack discussions, they do those in small groups of usually around 6 individuals. And the reason we do so much smaller discussions is that, number one, for our class, 30% of their course evaluation comes from their engagement in the discussion. So 1/3 of their grade in the class is based on what they do in these small group discussions mostly. And so we want the groups to be small enough that everyone has a space to have voice. Because I think when the groups get much larger than that, it's easy for a student to kind of hide, or just as Barry said, just not engage. But in this case, because of the importance of the discussion for their overall performance in class, it's really important that we have space for them. And we ask them, we evaluate each of their posts or each of their kind of the collective engagement for each discussion. 1/3 of their evaluation comes from fulfilling the assignment. In other words, did they address the prompt? And then 1/3 of their evaluation comes from, are they using course concepts, and are they using them correctly? In other words, are they drawing on the ideas? And then 1/3 is, are they building on something someone else said in the discussion, right? Are they making a substantial contribution? And the TAs really give them feedback. Another thing that we'll do is when we have posts that are just really spot on, they're really good, we'll put those in the general channel and attribute them to particular students as a way to call out exemplars of the kind of engagement that we're after. And by the end of the semester, or the end of the summer, this was a summer class, we find that the students are, we move from kind of a mechanistic adhering to the requirements to the discussion to more of an organic engagement with each other. They just kind of get into it, and the points fly accordingly.
All right, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to switch topics now, and let's talk about group projects. You both do group projects in your courses. And so let's go back to Barry. Barry, tell us about your group projects, what is challenging about them, and what tricks you use to make them work.
Well, I kind of stole my thunder, I guess, saying some things about it a few minutes ago, but I use group projects, I think I'm trying to think if this is true, I think it's largely for the independent inquiry flagged courses, again with that rationale that to do research you need both independent research, but you also need a consultation with other scholars who are working on the same kinds of things. So I'm thinking 2 courses come to mind right away. So I mentioned the other one a few minutes ago, which is the apocalyptic course. And so before they turn in the term paper, they have to turn in a research plan, and that tells me what their topic is. So I try to sort them into affinity groups by the kind of apocalyptic they're studying. And the other it's a fairly new course, which I taught last spring, we'll teach again this fall, called Communicating with Stuff. And the affinity groups there are the kinds of stuff that they want to study. Okay, so do they want to study cars? Do they want to study clothing? Whatever. And it works pretty well. There are always some people who change their minds, and there's some people who are very vague in the research plan. Of course, they don't do well in the research plan then. So I'm always kind of adding to and shifting, and here comes here comes some student who has suddenly awakened and discovered they need to do this, and they want to know which group to be assigned to. So So I try to do that, trying to find affinity groups. And then I don't ride on them beyond that. I tell them, go off, and they go off different places. There are different ways to make contacts with others. They all seem to, I've never had anyone say I'm lost, you know, I can't find anyone. They all know how to do that. And then they put together, each affinity group puts together a kind of presentation through some different kind of format. And that becomes then something that they are followed up on with discussion groups. I do save the best previous products of those groups and put those on Canvas. So I will save best term papers. I will save best research plans. I will save you know, best group presentation, so they can just see what a good one of those looks like. And every now and then they will ask me something about what they're doing, but it's mainly put them together in affinity groups and turn them loose.
Do you ever have situations where a group comes to you complaining that someone is not carrying their weight?
Yes, and I make it clear. I say it's a group grade, but everyone's name has to be on the first slide. And if someone's not carrying their weight, you make a group decision. Don't put their name on the first slide. And that sometimes happens. That, you know, that they make that decision. And I've never had any student, the students who, you know, kind of get thrown out of their groups, have very few of them, and no one has ever complained to me about it. I think they know when they've messed up.
All right. So Josh, same question to you. Tell us about your group projects and how you form the groups and what they do, and how do you actively monitor their progress and nudge them along, or let them fly, be free?
We're more monitory in our approach, I think, but we have a similar kind of final option, I think, as what Barry is mentioning. In the syllabus, we talk about the importance of their group project. It's an experiential learning class, and so a third of their grade comes from kind of mastery of fundamental concepts. A third is the discussions that I just talked about, and the other third is this group project that they do together, where they interview folks that work in an organization, and then they do an analysis of the espoused values or mission of the organization, and then the interview-based accounts of what day-to-day life in the organization is like, and they look for agreement or disagreement, alignment, or between the kind of espoused culture and lived culture in the organization. A big part of this class is then reflecting on how it's going throughout the semester. And so the first thing that we have them do is, along with, you know, submitting as a group what organization they're going to focus on, there's a set of questions that we ask them to come to terms with each other about, which lays out kind of what their expectations about how they're going to interact with each other, who's going to do what, and so forth. And then at the middle of their work together, we have a big deliverable that's due, because usually when I've seen group conflict happen, it's around some big deliverable. And if they have to kind of have that conflict to then be able to manage it effectively. So then right after that, they do a mid-project evaluation. There's a survey that we use for that. There's also an assignment they do individually, reflecting on how they're doing. And one of their Slack discussions is discussing with each other about how it's going and who's going to do what moving forward and what they ought to do differently as a team. So kind of baked in is reflecting as individuals and reflecting as team members about how they're doing. That's also a point for us to intervene with them if it looks like they need help. And so, you know, sometimes they'll, at our urging, will come to us early and say, this person's not being responsive. I think you know, the things that I'm describing, the folks on this call probably have had group projects in their classes at one time or another. What I think is distinctive about teaching online and having group projects is that the students underestimate the need for a meeting like this, a Zoom meeting. They think they can just divide the work up, each do their part and glue it together. At least that's been my experience for the teams that struggle in this class. And you really have to push them to spend some time thinking together. And once they start making that transition to spending some time on their process and spending some time, you know, deciding how they're going to use technology, what their shared expectations around technology are. For example, this last semester, I had a student who was overseas who wasn't getting the text messages the students were sending. And at the same time, even though he wasn't replying to their messages in Slack either, and they had just these kind of unstated expectations about how they wanted to work and how they expected others to work. And managing their conflict was really about getting them to talk with each other about what those things were. So I will also, in the syllabus, we set this up. I say that, you know, if we make the determination that they are not doing their fair share, then they can be removed from a group. I've fired people from their group for not doing their fair share. But also it's also happened that just like maybe someone will have like a health emergency and they can do the work, but they can't do it at the pace of the group. And so in that case, it's not that they lose out, they just have to do the assignment on their own, or what remains of the assignment on their own. And then the other piece is at the end of the semester, we do another peer evaluation, and I share kudos with each other anonymously, so they can, it's kind of like a multi-point assessment where they can give each other a thumbs up, and I share those in their Slack channels. Each team has a Slack channel that's theirs for this project. But I also will adjust their score on group work up or down, depending on my assessment of their contributions, and they have to articulate what they contributed to the group project, as well as the estimations and evaluations of their teammates. So that's how we manage group work. So a lot of this is stuff that we would do face-to-face, you know, whether it was online or not. But I think the online piece that's particularly challenging is pushing them to have a conversation about how they're going to manage their relationships with the technology.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I am going to switch now to online testing as a topic. And for the participants in the meeting today, feel free to enter your questions in the chat. We're going to leave the last 15 minutes of the session open, or, you know, wait until that point and you can raise your hand and ask questions as well. But I'm going to go back to Barry on this. Your courses are asynchronous for the most part, except when you give tests, everybody's taking the test at the same time. So could you talk about your strategy for online testing and what has worked? And particularly with regard to deterring collusion.
Yeah, well, my classes have between 2 and 5 tests. It depends on the subject matter. And they always have multiple choice, short answer, and essay. And the essay is a considerable part of the test. And I tell them it's open book, open note. So there's never mystery there. I think what makes me not that concerned about collusion, and maybe I'm naive, who knows, are these things. One, I find that the scores are not significantly different from the scores in a proctored in-person testing environment. So I don't think it makes that much difference. Second, make sure that you mix up the items, have new items and that kind of thing, so they can't, you know, see what was the test given last semester and use that. 2, a strict time limit. They have an hour and a half. It's strictly enforced, although inevitably with Canvas, we get some technological glitches that cause us to have to cut people a break. That's okay. But they don't have just forever to take the test. And I think what that means is you kind of have to know the material. You can't say to yourself, well, you know, I'll not read the book, and since it's open book, I'll just, you know, look up the answer at the last minute. You just can't do that. There's just not time to do that. I do have study guide questions for each test. Study guide questions for the books, for the lectures. I always have video applications, little movies they have to see, and there's study guide questions for those too. So there's a fair bit to study. As far as collusion, you know, I guess they could be, but I just don't think they have time for it. I don't think there's time enough in that hour and a half. And of course, we are, as we grade it, then we're on the lookout for similar answers. Every now and then you will get similar answers, and then you confront the student and you know, deal with it from there. But that's usually not, in my experience, a factor. So I feel reasonably confident that whatever collusion they may be doing is not materially affecting the grade, and that they cannot succeed in those tests without really having studied and mastered the material. That's what I think.
Thanks. And Joshua, you take a different approach for testing. You have tests as well, but you use Proctorio, the online proctoring system. So will you describe what it is in case someone doesn't know what it is, and talk about your reasons for using it and what has worked well for you?
Sure. Proctorio is a service that there's an extension that's kind of built into Canvas if you elect to use it, and students access Canvas, a Canvas test, using the Chrome browser, and Proctorio monitors their taking of the test on Canvas. So you create the test in Canvas, the Proctorio piece is only kind of monitoring what they're doing. And the Proctorio extension does a couple of things. One, it locks down their browser so that they can't screenshot the test, they can't copy the text from the test. In other words, if you've written multiple choice questions, you already know how hard it is to write good ones and the kind of our desire to be able to reuse them. And so that's one piece of Proctorio, is it protects the questions themselves. Another thing that Proctorio does is they have to have a webcam enabled for us. Proctorio has different settings. So you can use it just to protect your quiz, or you can use it, some of the surveillance options. There's a range of kind of settings, and you can choose to use some of the tools or all of the tools. The surveillance is looking at their eye movements. It's looking at noise in the room. It's looking at their IP address, so that if two students were sitting side by side with a laptop, they'd be, it would see that in their internet traffic. And basically it's using artificial intelligence, machine learning based technology to look for indicators of what might be signs of collusion. And then and then it gives each student a score. And then the faculty member can go in and look at a particular, moment in their test taking that might be suspicious. I've never had a student actually collude with Proctorio. I think, like Barry said, there's a lot of reasons why they're not cheating, they're not colluding, I don't think. And one thing I will say is that I wouldn't just use Proctorio. Proctorio, I think, has to be part of a broader kind of strategy in your teaching to remove the temptation to collude. I had a teaching mentor who told me that it's not my job to be a police officer, but at the same time, we want to just remove the temptation, And the way that we do that in this class is they do take, we call them quizzes, not exams, but each one is worth about 6% of their grade overall, and they take 5 of them, but they can drop 1. So they're lower stakes. They take them at the conclusion of each kind of unit of material. And that's a big part of it too, is they're lower stakes. They are 30-minute quizzes, but they can take them at any point in time in a 3-day window. And we just ask them on their honor not to share material from the quiz with each other. And again, my evidence that they don't is that the distribution of scores tends to look just like what it looks like when they're face-to-face. What else? One other piece of getting Proctoria to work, I think, is we do a dry run. In the first week of class, before they take a quiz, they take a mock quiz where they go in and answer questions and set up Proctorio. And that addresses a lot of the anxiety that they have about it. We also do a mid-semester period where they give us feedback and we try to change things about the class. And one of the things they highlighted this week, or this last time we taught, was the amount of time available for Proctoria, that some of them felt that the 30 minutes wasn't enough time. So we looked at the median time that students took for quiz 1 and doubled it. So that instead of having 30 minutes, they had 36, because the typical student took about 18 minutes to finish the quiz. And that was a change we made in the class based on their feedback. So I think that's kind of what our general approach is the exams are a means to an end. You know, we want them to know some of these foundational concepts well enough that they can call them off the top of their head. We also allow them to bring, we don't allow open notes, but we allow them to bring in a 1-page sheet of notes, acronyms, kind of what we call it, a 1-page cheat sheet, you know, that they can bring in to the quiz with them. So yeah, that's our approach to Proctorio.
All right. Well, we don't have any questions in the chat yet, but I'll just ask both of you, what additional advice do you have for instructors who are new to this world of online teaching and learning?
You want to go first, Barry?
Josh? No, you go ahead.
I think the biggest piece of advice is to be patient with yourself. It's not just that you are going to be teaching online. You're teaching online at this moment of societal upheaval and the pandemic, and you know, there's a lot going on. And when I first started teaching, I remember being a week ahead of the students, you know, and so you can do this. I think the key is to be patient with yourself. You know, don't limit what you think you can do. I think one of the most useful things when I was preparing to teach this class, and thankfully I had the kind of leisure to talk to different folks, was seeing what other people were doing so that I could, you know, take a little bit of that and borrow Barry's fare for the end of the semester discussion. And it kind of expanded what I thought of as possible. And the thing that I tried to do the first time I taught this class online was maybe teach a little bit less than I would have face-to-face, but do less better. You know, try to focus on doing less as well as I could. So I think that's the most important thing, is being patient with yourself and giving yourself space inside the semester to develop the course as it goes. And one thing that we do that I think has been something we will always repeat is a couple of weeks in, or a weekend if it's during the summer, we ask the students how the discussions are going. In other words, we get their input and adjust. And that's the other part of that is as you're getting it going, you know, ask them, how are the discussions going? What could make them better? And get them involved in taking some responsibility for the quality of the engagement. And I found that if I'm able to listen to their suggestions and make adjustments, and they have a little more buy-in in the class because they've gotten to have a say in how it's going to run. So that would be my advice in general.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Barry?
Yeah, I'd say if you're new at this, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. So this broke last spring and everyone's, you know, having to change over and so forth. Well, my undergraduate courses have been online for a long time, so I didn't have to do that. I mean, I found a lot of people in my department, present company accepted, Joshua, were, you know, just running around, just panic, what am I gonna do, what am I gonna do? And I said, our motto here is from Jerry Jeff Walker, if I can just get off of that LA freeway without getting killed or caught. And you want to look at what other people have done. You want to look at a lot of examples. You want to figure out what is congenial with you and how you teach and what you want to teach. But certainly do that. If you're, as I'm sure you know, if you're on Canvas, other people can admit you as observers. You can admit others as observers. And it's a good way just to, you know, to look over people's shoulders. As John Daly in my department was trying to put together a online instruction himself, he has to be admitted as an observer to some of my online classes. I think it helped him, I don't know. So search broadly for examples and just try to put something together that's respectable the first time. You can go back and tweak and make it better and better and better, but cut yourself a break if it's your first time putting things together.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Amen.
We have a question in the chat from Mary Bach. Do you have rubrics for the discussion grading that you can share?
Yes, I'm glad to share that.
Go ahead.
I do, and I will. Go ahead, Barry. What were you going to say?
Well, I don't grade per se as just count up substantive discussions, because like I said, I kind of want to follow the model of what I would do in class. And if I'm having a discussion in class, I'm not going to say, well, you know, Ted over here made a discussion. Ted, that's an A-. You know, I'm not doing that. So I want to make sure it's substantive, that it moves the conversation forward. But other than that, I just want them to participate. And I think that there's a kind of freedom in not being graded for your discussion comments other than you did it. And it counts. So I don't do that. But Josh is a lot smarter than I am. He's probably figured it out.
Yeah, no, the rubric that we have with the students is really straightforward. And for this class, the teaching assistants, I'm in the discussions, talking with the students. The teaching assistants are in there. Good to see you, Amanda. Have a good rest of your day. So I'm in there with the students. I'm talking to them. And the TAs are as well, but then the TAs and speed grader will evaluate their work, and they're looking for three things. It's usually the first post is 10 points, and then the discussion portion is 20 points. But we break all of it, the 30 points down into 10 points for fulfilling the assignment, whatever that is. So in the moon landing, they have to make a list together of, you know, what they prioritize with each other. One Slack discussion they do is a team progress check-in, and they have to articulate an answer to 4 questions about how they're doing now, what they would change moving forward, and so forth. It's just a reflection exercise. So the first point is, did they do it? Did they do whatever the assignment calls for? Another third of the 30 comes from, are they using course material or not? And so we're looking for concepts. We're looking for, you know, other ideas from readings, from lectures, and that they're correct. Is there something there, right? Are they drawing on something concrete? And then the last third is, are they building? Are they responding to someone? Are they synthesizing something they see in the discussion? Are they asking a question? And the way that we evaluate those 30 points is, let's say for a given Slack discussion that's going to unfold over the period of, say, 3 days, we look at everything, all the posts that they put in there, and look at them holistically to say, are they doing those things in their engagement in the discussion during that time? And the way you can do that in Slack, where you can search in a window of time and say, show me all the posts from this person in this window of time in this channel. So you can look, just like in SpeedGrader, and see everything that they've contributed. And that's what we look for. And our approach is early on in the semester, we give them the feedback in those categories, but we don't mark them down. As long as they post something, they get the points. And then in the next week, they start to lose some points. And by the third week, we feel like they have pretty clear expectations about what we're expecting. And we've been highlighting examples in the general channel of what works really well. So the overall, each Slack discussion is worth 30 points, and there's 10 of them over the course of the semester. So out of 1,000 points in the class, all the discussions combined are 30% of their grade.
Okay, great. We've got another question from Stacy. I'm new to Canvas and Slack. Is Slack through UT or through Canvas? And if Slack isn't through Canvas, where do students resistant to using it? Were students resistant to using it? Is there any chat function available through Canvas?
There is a chat function available through Canvas, and Mary would know that better than me. And I will say the Slack is not something that we have a license for through UT. It's a free service, like a lot these days, where if you can use a certain measure of the functionality, and then beyond that, you would have to pay. For us, we get all we need out of that base level functionality. And the limits there are you can only have 10,000 messages over the course of your Slack. And then once you reach 10,000, the first message gets forgotten, if that makes sense. In other words, you can't access it anymore. And so there's a rolling 10,000 message limit, which is more than enough. Over the course of the semester, we tend to have about 12,000 messages sent and received in a 60-person class. And so the first 2,000 or so that they've sent have faded from you, but by then that's ancient history. The other limitation is there's a size limit. So there's a 5 GB limit in the file sharing that you can do in Slack. And the way that we get around that, especially because a lot of what they share are early on are like videos where they're introducing themselves, and some of the students will record these high definition iPhone videos of their self-introduction that can be, I had a student submit a gigabyte large 2-minute video, but we have them submit those using a file request through Box. So you can create a Box folder and then create a link associated with that Box folder that when they click on it, it gives them space to upload files to that Box folder. And we have them submit anything that is really large through Box. The trouble with Canvas and submitting large files is that my experience is uploading in Canvas is really fragile. And so once you have a really large file that you're uploading in Canvas, it'll fail on them, or they'll think it's gone through and it hasn't. And Box is rock solid by comparison. So once they've uploaded in a Box, we create a Panoptico link. We used to use Vimeo, but we're moving over to Panoptico because UT does have a license for that. And then we post the link to whatever the resource is, the video or the digital media deliverable that they created in Slack. And that's a very low, the size of those posts is very low. So that's the deal with Slack.
Okay.
When my groups post stuff, they hardly ever just, like put a PowerPoint presentation on Canvas. It's almost always a link.
Yeah.
And you have to remind them sometimes to make those links discoverable to other people.
Yeah.
That is sometimes a factor.
I've been really impressed with the range of skill that they show in producing these digital media deliverables. Some of them are kind of boring, but some of them, they really get creative. One kind of insight that we had from the first time versus now is their digital media deliverable is based on a written assignment they produce as a team. And when we first taught the class, the written assignment and the digital media deliverable were due at the same time. And that was a mistake because for reasons you can imagine. And so we made it so that there was during the semester, there's a 2-week difference. And during the summer, there's just like a 5-day difference. So they have their written report. And what that does is producing the written report gives them a lot of content that they then have to make choices about in producing their digital media deliverable. And we've seen just an incredible range of technical sophistication. We also have some, for example, some RTF students who take the class for us in CMS, and they bring, those production skills. And that's a way that they can contribute that maybe other members of their teams can't. And so we encourage them to talk about that too. Think about the different skills that you have that you could contribute to what the group needs. And maybe you're going to analyze the interview data and write it up and contribute to that. And then you're going to transform it into, a recorded movie. So yeah, they're pretty impressive.
Yeah. Let's see, Jayun asks, are there intro videos to learn the Slack software?
We produce one, and there are a bunch of resources that we'll point them to. We point them to just two that we really like that walk them through how Slack works and so forth. But we produce one that shows them how we're going to use the technology. And it's one of the videos they're required to watch as part of the module in that first getting used to class. And then, halfway through, one idea that a student actually gave us was to halfway through the semester have a contest in the general channel where people submit and vote up or down the best Slack tip. As again, a way to get them thinking about the technology choices they're making.
Okay. Any other questions in the chat, or raise your hand, or comments?
I'll do a hand raise.
Okay.
Hey, Joe.
Go, Joe.
Old-fashioned.
So, one of my questions about the discussion board is if they're getting points for it that are going to affect their grade. Have you had a chance, or have you had occurrences where you have what I call point grubbers, where they come in and I only need a half a point to get from a B+ to an A-, and you gave me 1.75, and if we could just get this up to a 2.2, then I can round up. Do you have people come in and really challenge what, and how do you go? I mean, Josh, you said you had a rubric, but when you get down into kind of the micro points of it all, what do you do with the ones who come in and just need a little bit more, and they're really essentially asking you just to make up a grade for them, which I really resist. I'm curious if that's a fault, if that's a scarecrow that I don't need to worry about, or if y'all have had circumstances with that, and if so, how you handle that.
We deal with it. I mean, of course we do. To answer your first question, do you get that? Yes. And we deal with it in a couple of ways. One is that each Slack discussion is not worth so much, right? So, along the course of the semester, it's really about continuous engagement, not any one kind of period. Another piece is that along with the Slack discussions, they're doing activities that are self-paced, that are individually driven. So they're doing those on their own. And there's more activities available than are required. So there's 110 points that they have to complete, but there's 140 available, and we let them earn extra points through those activities. And so if a student comes to me and says, oh, well, I missed the Slack discussion, then an easy thing for me to say is, well, just do one of the extra activities and you can replace it that way. And the other thing that we do is the class is out of 1,000 points. And at the end of the semester, if they're 5 points away from the next highest grade, we bump them up. So we round up at that point. And that manages most of it. Now, we don't publicize the fact that we round up. We do, and we do it across the board. We don't tell them that, because then what would happen. Right. Then they would come and they would say, well, I'm 5 points away from being 5 points away.
Yes.
And so invariably, the students who come, who speak to us, that are really close, their grades have already been moved up at the end of the semester, or they're so far away from the next piece. And then the last thing is we have a regrading policy in the class. And in order to have your work reevaluated, they have to submit a letter in writing to me describing what we missed using the rubric for the assignment.
Okay.
And they have to submit that within 7 days of having the evaluation back. And so in the syllabus, they see there is a regrade policy, and that allows us to kind of mitigate pushback at the end of the semester, because our expectation is that if they had a concern about an evaluation, they would raise it within 7 days of getting the feedback.
I do that 7-day thing too. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Sure thing. We make clear to them as well that their evaluation, when I regrade their work, may go up or down, depending on how I apply the rubric in that moment.
Yeah, I will also bump up at the end, but not publicize it. And they have to be typically, say out of 300 or 400, they have to be closer than 5, but you're based on 1,000 points, so that seems reasonable. As far as weasels, yeah, it says in the Bible, verily the weasels will be always with you. One thing I do is if they're going to complain about a grade on an assignment, they must have done it within 1 week of getting it back.
Yeah, same.
After that, forget it. So that I think that that helps. Make clear what in the syllabus what the structure of the grading system is. I add up points. I don't use averages. Of course, the complaint is always, well, here's my average, and you know, you should address that. So I don't, you know, I don't worry about it that much, and I do at the end of the semester now. I haven't been able to do this since COVID, and we'll just have to see what happens, but I like to sit down with the TAs and we go over everyone's grade, and the ones who were close, we'll look to see what they got, and I'll hear that, you know, this person was 5 points down on the paper. Who graded that paper? Oh, you graded that paper. You want to address that? Was that a solid 5? Was it maybe an iffy 5, and that kind of thing.
Thank you, guys.
I think the one online piece of that is, in some ways, it's also easier to say to a student who is raising that question in a Zoom call or via email, no. You know, in the office it's harder, but I find it a lot easier to say no to people via Zoom. So the other thing is, with all these structures in place, I can say, well, you know, I looked and I saw what you contributed in Slack, or I looked at this. No, there is no other thing to do. This is the class.
Yeah.
One factor for me is to look at their discussion participation.
Exactly.
And earn them points up or down, and you'd be surprised the number of people who moan and wail about how close they are, but they didn't help themselves. They didn't do the discussion contributions that could have brought them up.
Okay, well, it is 3:59, so I want to first give you some applause and thank you. Thank you both, and thank you everyone who participated. This is recorded, and I will be sending that link to the participants. So thanks again, and have a great day.
You too. Okay. Thanks for hosting, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see everyone. Bye-bye.